So you're down to 5, and we are going live. So whenever you want to start the meeting.
Okay. Good evening. It's Monday, September 9th, 2020. It's approximately 6:16, 6:15. I wish to call to order the meeting of the September meeting of the City of Oxford Historical and Architectural Preservation Commission. Why don't we start with the roll call? Chris Gogland here. Houston
I'm here.
is here. I see. Edna.
Here.
Okay. Corey.
Here.
Corey's there. Okay. Dana, have we gotten?
You haven't heard from Dana, but you have a quorum, so you can start.
Okay, why don't we go on? And then Chad is not going to make it, and neither is Sean. So then we have Sam. So do I have an approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting? Do I have a motion for the approval of the?
So moved.
Okay. Move.
I'll second that motion.
Corey, do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, second by Houston. Very good. Okay, the agenda. At this point, I would like to open the meeting up to any public comments for anything not related to anything further on the agenda, further on this evening's agenda. Sam, do we have anyone out there that wishes to make a public comment?
We do not, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, moving on.
Mr. Chair, Dana just joined the meeting.
Okay. Dana, thank you.
Yep.
No public comments. The minutes from the meeting of July 8, 2020 were attached to your handout and the material. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them? Are there any corrections or anything that needs to be made to the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the July 8th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Okay, okay. Seconded by, motion by Edna, seconded by Corey. Good to go. Okay. Moving on, new business. Tonight we have one application. It is HAPC 2020-12, 101 West Church, the demolition and construction of a 4-story structure in the Uptown Historic District. Norm Butt, the architectural group, is the applicant and agent. You may recall there was a preliminary done on this at our August meeting. So Sam, do you want to go ahead and share with us what you have from a staff comments?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I'll be happy to do that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the graphics and presentation because I know that Norm, the architect for the owner, has a lot of graphics as well. But just to recap, as you mentioned, Chris, there was a previous discussion. This because it's a major project requires a pre-application, which happened at the July meeting, which is what your minutes were about. And there were some comments provided back. And ultimately, there wasn't a vote taken because that's the nature of the pre-application, is to give some individual comments and for the applicant team to kind of get a feel for where the commission might be going with the preliminary concept so that they can decide whether to go ahead with their concept or make some changes to it. And also what came out of that discussion was a vote to authorize the staff to go ahead and retain some consultants to do the financial analysis. So this is the first case since the 2019 code has been in place where we've had a demolition of a building that was designated as historic in the 2018 inventory. Of course, the historic district didn't change, but the properties that were outside of High Street primarily were not cataloged and categorized. So that 2018 inventory did provide a lot more detail for property owners and for the commission to make decisions if there are cases like this that come up, so that things are not so much of a mystery about what is expected to happen. This building was designated as historic and approved by council in 2018, as we discussed in July. So because of that, there's the pre-application requirement, and there's also a standard that has to be met that if the building has not been condemned or has not been found to be in a state where it needs to be demolished as determined by the building official, although there was a repair order made on the electrical systems. If the building is requested to be demolished, there has to be a financial analysis to show that the repairs that are necessary in order to bring the property into what the code calls a purposeful use, if those repairs are more than 50% of the fair market value of the building, then that could authorize a demolition. And so we did that over this time gap. It wasn't available for the August meeting, so the applicant team decided to go ahead and request postponement. And so we kind of mutually decided that was the best route to take rather than have a meeting without that information. We did, as a city staff, we did hire Deerdorf Appraisal, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at that in your packet, and maybe you've picked up a hard copy as well. We did also retain Bracket Builders to review the two estimates that the applicant team put together for us. One was there were different numbers, but both had a fair bit of detail. Deerdorf Appraisal found the fair market value to be $410,000 for the building. And there were two construction estimates. One was $218,000, one was $313,000 for the work. The code that was written in, that was approved by council in 2019 did not anticipate involuntary fire damage or any kind of damage. So we're not actually talking about a situation where we're looking at a casualty, but because of, in order to bring that building into purposeful use, it was repairing fire damage to do that. That is why the costs are what they are. Bracket Builders, we retained Bracket Builders, and I think we just have a one-page memo in there from them. We got experience with them on their work with the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity. Happened to be a fire damage as well. That wasn't the reason we chose them, but they did do historic restoration, so we believe that they were experienced in that. They reviewed both estimates and found them to be within reason and what they see in the industry for historic restoration, fire damage repair, those type of things. So both estimates were over the 50% threshold. So the discussion tonight, in my opinion, should be more about the proposed design that the applicant team has and its degree of appropriateness for the surrounding context and for the district overall. I did get some more research done on Friday after the packet went out about the history of the site itself. I don't know that would change necessarily the outcome of the discussion, but it did help me to feel more confident about what was in the inventory on the Irish riot and Benjamin Harrison. So the evidence is a lot better than I thought. And there were actually 3 people killed in the Irish riot, which it wasn't really a riot. It was an altercation or a scuffle that went on by some intoxicated folks. And unfortunately, people died as a result. And it did have to do with the unequal payment was what the allege was of an Irish worker for the property owner at the time who actually lived at 101 West Church Street. So I was able to validate that. There were 3 or 4 sources for that. So the town just called it the Irish riot for some reason. I'm not sure why. Then the other reference in the inventory has to do with Benjamin Harrison. And I did find a reference at the Smith Library that was a copy of a Miami yearbook from the early 1900s. It's just one sentence that said Benjamin Harrison boarded at this property for a time. It didn't say how long or what, where that came from. So I don't think that's going to really affect the outcome a whole lot, but it did help to validate the reference in the inventory since your commission is a historic and architectural preservation commission. I think it's important to understand that there are the hidden and the tangible elements of the historic district. Um, the design that Mr. Butt and the team from the architectural group put together is a 4-story building that has underground parking. It would take up pretty much the full quarter block. It would comply with the setbacks of zoning. There is an offset at the intersection of the alleys. It does have angled roof and has masonry exterior. And so I will share my screen briefly just to give you an overview of that. And while I'm doing that, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in while I'm getting that going here.
So Sam, if I could, this was Chris, based on the research you just shared, as that just affirms the classification of this building being classified as historic
Correct.
in the inventory, the 2018 inventory. At least that's how I interpreted your comments.
Well, Chris, this is Corey. I don't know when to discuss this, but one thing that Sam said was because it met the 50% threshold, our discussion should focus more on the design. And I realize that's a threshold, but it's not an automatic trigger. And one thing that you had brought up before was the majority of the fire damage or a large portion of the repair is in the non-historical part of the building. So I wonder if, and I don't remember it's been a couple months, but I remember having that discussion.
I recall just in it, and I think we need to hold some of that till we get into more of the debate. But to your point, the building the reference I was making is the building as a whole is considered historic. When the inventory was done, it wasn't done in such a way that an existing building was partitioned so that some sections would be classified as historic and others wouldn't. If it was a building in its entirety, the building in its entirety would be fallen into one of the 4 classifications. That was, the point I was raising at when we had the preliminary discussion, Corey.
Okay.
And to answer your comment there, Corey, is just so happened that the fire was actually more in the historic part. I don't think that that's relevant because the way the code's written and the way the inventory was done, just as Chris had said, it's looking at the entire building. But just to make sure that you understand where the damage happened, it did happen to be in the historic part.
Oh, I thought there was I was just going off the cost analysis, not necessarily physical damage. I thought that nor here nor there, but also just for a point of clarification, that would make the several years old part of the Fiji house historic, even though it was built in since 2013. Just maybe we want to separate conversation, but we might want to revisit how the code's written.
Good point. So if it's okay, Chris, I'll just go through these
Please.
graphics here.
Mhm.
So the first slide I've got here is, I hope you can see it. It's an overview of the quarter block between Beach and Church, and it shows a footprint of the existing building with the different additions on it.
Okay.
And then this slide shows the footprint of the proposed building that you had reviewed at the pre-application. And so you can get an idea for the differences between the two. And you can see the offset I was talking about that would not be part of the building. You can see the setbacks along the street, landscaping. I do see some angled parking here. That's not actually part of your direct scope, although you can comment on it since that's in the public right of way. That's typically something more handled by the administrative staff. But if you have comments on it, we can pass it along to the staff. And then this slide these are the elevation drawings. The top elevation, and I can zoom in on that, is the Beach Street side. This would be looking west. And you can see the reference building of what was the Princess Theater, 10 North Beach, to the left. And then the bottom rendering is the elevation drawing looking south. This would be on the Church Street side. And I'll just skip on ahead to my recommendation, which is based on the information we have at this point. And I did learn earlier that the applicant team does have some additional images. My recommendation in the staff summary report was to table based on the comments from the pre-application, which centered around, there wasn't a vote taken, but my sense was that there was a desire to have a better feel for what the impact would be. And my assessment on how to do that would be through a three-dimensional view or rendering that would kind of take into context the surrounding buildings across the street so that you can have a better idea. This is a really big project. It's not really bigger than other projects that have happened, but those projects have been on High Street. So because this is not a High Street project, and listening to your comments in July, I felt that in my discussions with Chris outside the meeting, was some type of three-dimensional view would be helpful. So with that, I'll turn it back to commission members or Chris to answer any questions about procedural steps, or if you want to turn it over to the applicant team, that's fine as well.
Do we, from a point of order, is now the time to ask for comments, or should we wait for the applicant team to make their presentation?
I would recommend it after. That's typically how we do it with all the boards, after the applicant makes their presentation. But you'll want to have some kind of a threshold between presentation and commission discussion, and that is where you want to have the public comments, if there are any.
I just want to make sure that,
Yeah, you sort of have a breaking point, after 10 or 15 minutes from the applicant team, then see if there's any public comments before you go into your commission discussion.
why don't we do that then? Very good, Sam. Okay. So, shall we have the applicant make their presentation? Is everyone in agreement with that? I'm looking at the screens, everyone's nodding yes. So Sam, why don't we proceed in that manner?
All right, sounds good. Norm, I think you have the ability to share your screen, or if you just want to talk first, that's up to you.
Tell you what, I will, well, first of all, just as when we did the preliminary discussion, it was kind of introduction of who we are as the architectural group and the relationship we have with Dudley, Terry Dudley and Kathy Dudley and their properties and how we actually kind of got here. My name's Norman Butt. I'm a principal with the architectural group, and I've been a principal with the architectural group since its founding 30 years ago, and am a registered architect for 30 years. Our firm specializes in, my specific specialization is in historic, institutional university, and institutional healthcare. So this project has kind of been brought forward to our firm to help the Dudleys kind of analyze in the very beginning the situation that had occurred because of the fire and how we might be able to help them make decisions as to what the next processes were on that. I do want to thank all of you for your time in terms of the review of the information that we presented, as well as comments that you're making tonight, and Sam for helping package this all up in this format. As you can tell from the approach that we've taken and the information that we've given, we've taken a very, very thorough approach to this. As a community member, I know how important your commission is, how important this building is in the community, and I think it deserved every bit of attention that we could give to it. One of the things that was brought up is because I probably did not give enough information that allowed you to understand our perception of this building and the scale of this building in relationship to the community, to adjacent buildings, historic buildings, as well as buildings that are non-historic contributing that are around this area too. I thought it necessary that we do the best we can in the time we had from the time Sam put his information out to put together a 3D image of this. So we have done that. We were able to do that from last week until about 10 minutes before this presentation. So I'll show that in a little bit. But one of the things I wanted to do is go back to the attention that we did give to this. Not only, it wasn't just a reaction as to let's tear the building down and move forward with something else, or move backward with something else. We took a serious look at the history of the building too, and quite familiar with the building, all the way back to the Cincinnati Enquirer 1862 newspaper clipping that talked about what happened during that time, which isn't consistent with some of the future evaluations of what happened during that time. So 1862, and actually there was a document that came out June 26, just of this year, that was online by the Lane Public Library, giving it a relationship of what happened historically to maybe what has happened a little bit with the George Floyd incident. So we've really paid attention to that historic part of it to kind of get an analysis of this building and how important this building is, and that we were making decisions and moving forward with the full knowledge of the characteristics of that. The other thing that we really did is we looked at all the information from the inventory to the design guidelines, and paid a lot of attention and tried to be detailed as to when I was designing this, that we were using that information that had been created in 2018-19 for how we would direct this building, which I really see as a mediating building between the uptown area, uptown business district area, which is where this is located, uptown district, but it's also an uptown district, which is part of the historic fabric of the community. So I think that's very, very important. So we really wanted to look at all of the design guidelines that were presented, as well as the inventory. And we looked at the inventory, not only the inventory, and what it said in that inventory, and then the reference it had to online descriptions of the property too. So we looked at all those things. The other thing, clearly, when we're talking about a demolition of a building and a condition that's occurred after a fire, we're looking at what is the condition, what was the condition before, what is the condition at this time, what are the circumstances that allow us to make a decision as to even make a recommendation for demolition or repair. And clearly that played into not turning its back on the historicism, but what are the pragmatics of what the cost factors are that are involved with that. So that was very important too. The other thing in terms of community needs, one of the things that I think we recognize and have some information about is the need in the uptown district to have housing for professors, for visiting professors, for graduate students. So how, if the building is approved to be demolished, what is the best use? Especially when it is a mediation, or it's a building that is a transitional building between the uptown area, with most of the buildings in the uptown area being the 4-story buildings, and then transitioning into the community itself and the residential to the north. So those are very important factors. And then of course we looked at all this, the COA review criteria and followed that. I do not want to, and don't think it would be appropriate to go through item by item of the documents that we presented, but I think you can see that the documents are primarily divided into two avenues of development. One is, which is addressing the part of the demolition component of that, and the cost involved with it, and then the evaluation of the building. And the second part, of course, is the building design itself. So I'm going to, if I could, share my screen. Sam, it says disabled. Am I able to share my screen? There we go.
That should do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Primarily, if I start at the very beginning of this, these are the components, and it's an interesting conversation about where historicism stops and starts. Clearly, the overall building is the language of what the historical character is of the building. What's interesting to this is the original building, which in essence started after 1911 when the property was purchased, but it really came into effect somewhere in the records between 1839 and 1846 when it really became a masonry building. The original size of the building is about 2,000 square feet, and all the additions that have happened since then is someplace in the neighborhood of about another 4,700 square feet. So in terms of what, Corey's question and thinking about where the fire occurred, this is the original building right here. This is the west elevation to that original building. And it's over here. You can see that everything else has been added on in a sequence of additions over a period of time. And this is where the actual damage occurred on both the first floor and the second floor, and then with smoke damage that occurred that carried into the existing building, and some of the areas where water damage also occurred. One of the reason that we had been involved is I was contacted by Terry and Kathy to have them take a look at the building, first of all, not with the intent of tearing it down, but where are we? What does this mean structurally? What do we have going on? Because on January 27th, when the fire occurred, luckily nobody was injured, but the building was still left in pretty deleterious situation. And as you can see on some of these photographs, it isn't just the floor systems and some of the other things. It's actually the roof truss structure itself. And so there's a real importance about the viability of this building and securing it so that if it does stay in this condition for any period of time, especially with any winter coming, that we're not having then roof structural problems beyond where they are now. So that's a component of the structural damage. Now, what was also determined, and at that time, 1 week later, this letter that was in your packet was submitted to the Dudleys from the Office of the Building Official, primarily saying it's a hazardous condition. It needs to be repaired. It can't stay as a hazardous condition. So yes, it wasn't condemned, but it is in such a hazardous condition that not only this part of the building, but the rest of the building was pretty much told to be non-occupied. At the same time, too, right around that time and during the process when the fire department was there, as you're well aware, the Chief Dethridge had indicated that the source of the fire in the historic area itself was in the wall structures and in the ceiling structures of the old plaster historic portion, not in any of the new portion. So with that, the damage to the structure is to the structure itself, but even in trying to repair it, all of the plaster walls have to be opened up, and the building has to be continually opened up to expose all of those old electrical wire we've been pulling out. And then it was really up to our two estimators to determine if they felt that they could put a new breaker panel that would just be isolated to this, or it had to go back in the old structure. And both of them determined that the electrical would have to be replaced from here back into the new building. So there's a whole series of things on that. So in regards to the costs themselves, one of the things that we did, when we did the preliminary review, we only had Ferguson Construction's number. So at that point, I felt it was really imperative to us to bring in another team to give us another estimate to see how it compared. So we knew that at least we had a competitive and comparative analysis of this. Both of these numbers are different approaches to how it will be done. But with we're glad that the city did bring on Brackett to take a look at this, and Brackett Construction out of Troy, Ohio, I believe, who's doing a lot of historic work in Dayton and downtown along the riverfront, worked on the Phi Gamma Delta house, which I'm quite familiar with. So, and they came in and validated that these numbers are what they are. What's interesting about the Deerdorf analysis was that, yes, he did confirm that the building was about $410,000, which is about $60 per square foot. But in doing so, it validated what we had for the total existing value as opposed to the Butler County Recorder's Office. Because last time we didn't know at the preliminary how effective that valuation was by the Butler County Recorder's Office at 404,940. So the new appraisal by Deerdorf is at 410, so it's relatively close. So we know that those numbers are pretty solid too. But what's interesting in Deerdorf's review is that he gives a current value of the building after the fire has occurred as it stands now, and what the valuation was at 410,000, say almost immediately before the fire. The value as he holds it out now is $102,000. So there's about a $300,000 loss. And this isn't with him analyzing the construction cost. This is his appraisal value on a market value. And so right now, as the building stands, it's $102,000.
Yeah,
So-
but Norm, for comparison purposes within the ordinance, it's the fair market value.
Yes,
of the house.
correct.
Not post loss. It's
Correct. Yeah. So the fair market value that he's indicating is 410,000. And I appreciate Sam's summary of that, a lot shorter and a lot more to the point than what I just said. So that's where the building stands in terms of that documentation. If I go a little bit further here. I'm going to go back to Sam's a little bit. One of the things at the time we're evaluating this, as I said, we're also looking at what the existing conditions are to determine how it impacts other things. The building footprint, the lot size is 27,267 square feet, and it shows the building is about 6,700 square feet. In this, there's the information that's shown here also shows what some of the Uptown District requirements are, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that was part of the analysis in terms of where the building stood at that time. Now, in terms of the demolition appropriateness, this goes back to talking about the Federalist style building and the remnants of historic structures removed. One of the things that has occurred with this building, as all of the additions came into place, the whole interior of the existing structure, both the new and the historic, were totally modified. So the only character of the interior part of all the historic building throughout the overall is new drywall in the new areas, but all of this is plastered area. And one of the things that occurred on the south elevation of the original building between additions 1 and indication 3, large openings were cut in the exterior wall of that original building so that additions could be made, which have really totally compromised the back structural component of this building. So if those parts of the building were to be removed, that whole back part of the structure would have to be redeveloped, and that isn't even part of what has been under consideration for cost now. Because the thinking is, can you restore the building as it is? Is there consideration that it would have more of a historic character, what it was originally as a contribution to the community, and that could be taken off with parts of buildings built around it? And then an understanding, and the reason I show this and talk about the area around it, because even if that building stood, the basic structural size of new builds around this, based upon appropriateness, the current Uptown District Code still allows 4-story buildings with maximum square footage to the site, because the setbacks on the current development in the Uptown District area say that you can build right up to the alleyway, and you can for both alleys, and you would have to be 16 feet back, 16.6 back from and you can see the dash line there. So we're trying to really get an understanding of keeping this building, building onto this building, et cetera, and really truly with the characteristics of the building, the only thing of value for the original historic part is just the shell itself, which has over the years brought on other components, which clearly could be considered historic too at the time. Mainly 1929 forward was when a lot of the additions occurred, when it became a funeral home. So those were some of the conditions about that we underwent and really determined, based upon the cost, based upon the breakdown of the original structural characteristics of that all of this, even though it is, as you said, considered historic now based upon its timeframes, the original building itself is far different on the interior use of the building. And as it being considered a hazardous condition now, are requesting that a part of this appropriateness criteria for demolition is that you consider both the cost as well as the existing building really failing to structurally support itself if there's modifications made to it, that would be problematic, and hopefully that you would take that under consideration for the demolition of this building, and then follow it up with basis of what we did for any new structures on the site.
So Norm, could we just hit pause for a second and just recognize that given what's been presented, both the information that Sam has shared and you have also reflected, what you're looking here is a proposal, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost, there's two parts of this. One is the demolition of the existing structure,
Yes, correct.
and then the request for approval of the replacement
Yes,
structure.
yes.
I think we can just move things along that I will look out very quickly to the other members of the commission. But based on the numbers from here, I clearly see where the more than 50% criteria for demolition, coupled with the cost to repair, is more than 50% of the fair market value, coupled with what has come in from the building officials' recommendations, fire department, and so forth. So I have no issues with, from a standpoint of, is the demolition path the right path to take? Yeah, I think you've satisfied that criteria. Does anyone in the group have anything they want to reflect otherwise?
Yeah, yes, I understand the numbers and why demolition is recommended. But we could also talk about a partial demolition or the use of the facade or parts of the original building so that it's not a total demolition. Isn't that possible? In other words, isn't it possible to somehow maintain part of the original value, even if it's just, we understand that it's, it would only be the shell, but isn't it possible to incorporate elements of the original building without a total demolition into the new building? And so therefore, I asked that question. I think this is very sad to demolish this building, and I wish that this were not our only option. But I would like to entertain that idea as including parts of the original building so that it's not a total demolition, but a partial one.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. We did take that under consideration, and when we were looking at primarily the original residence itself, which is the masonry structure, which is on the east, west, and the north elevations, what would it take to secure that and bring that up into a state where it could be incorporated? The difficulty with that too, as I said, is the south elevation. We'd have to restructure all that, tear all the rest of it off, which is possible, but that is going to leave in essence, a 1,000 square foot footprint with buildings potentially around it that could be in essence 4 stories. And aesthetically, I think it might do more disservice to it than try to incorporate it into a retail or a restaurant or a professional office building. I think, and so one of the things that we've made some decisions at that time was, can we develop a building that has an appropriate design factor that becomes that mediator between the city and the uptown area and the residential district, and still give credence to those elements of the building that we would like to incorporate into this design with the recognition of its shape, of that if you were to take the building now and follow its guidelines, that's one of the things we did, was try to look at the guidelines of how the guidelines go to this existing building with brackets and a number of other things, and especially with the description that actually is listed. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at some papers here, but from the inventory, the review sheet from the inventory approved and the inventory notes, it talks about a symmetrical facade, windows that are 1-to-1 double hung, flat brick lintels, brackets at the cornice, decorative wrought iron fence, deep cornices and decorative brackets, front porch running across the facade with brick pillars and railings, decorative elements. So one of the things when we pulled off of what was on the historic inventory and the description of the building in terms of, you know, the pillars for the front, the fencing, the horizontality of the cornice and the different corners. Those are things that we thought could be probably best served in a structure that reflected and became that mediation between the Uptown District and the other areas, because this property allows itself to have built on it 4-story buildings. And we thought aesthetically it would be inappropriate to I guess the honor of this building to actually keep it there and turn it into something that became a small component of something much larger. And I think that was a little problematic aesthetically to consider. And so that was kind of the rationale for that. It could be done. I'm not so sure it's the greatest resolution of honoring the historicism of this building.
Norm, you've made mention of, you know, something to the effect, and correct me if I'm misstated.
Yeah.
That keeping this as a smaller building, but then having surrounding buildings, I'm not aware of, other than a lot, and Sam, maybe if we pulled up, you know, the street view of this, I'm not aware of adjacent lots that are empty and are developable, you know, eligible to be, that would be developed, where you'd see a larger building put, you know, adjacent to it and so forth. Maybe I'm.
No, Chris, I'm sorry. Maybe I did misspoke. It's on this lot around the existing building, not adjacent lots. That was my point.
Keeping a smaller building and then surrounding it with larger.
Yes.
I guess.
And I think because per the Uptown District development and zoning, you could do that with this structure. And we really looked at, as you saw from some of the separate information that we sent, we looked not only at the Uptown District, but we looked at what was happening in kind of this transition zone, especially on Church Street. And clearly across the street to the north is a historic structure. To its west, to its east, and cat corner historic structures. But immediately adjacent to those structures and in this same area and immediately to the south here are the non-historic contributing buildings. So even in the historic district as it is set now, even with the 2017, 18, the new regulations or the new analysis guidance of this, buildings that didn't validate to me that they were historic. It's great to have the inventory of that, but when those buildings were built with a clear awareness that there were buildings across the street that had historic character. It wasn't that your guidelines needed to validate those. I think those were there.
They were also, those buildings were built prior to
Yes.
the inventory being adopted and the ordinance being updated as well. So I think
Correct.
you have to keep that into consideration. And I don't have the ability, nor do anyone else has, that if we could, you know, unring the bell and roll back and say, if those buildings were presented today under what we have in terms of the inventory and the revised code, that, you know, the result would be the same.
Correct. And that's where the next stage of this and the next component of this is the appropriateness, the criteria of appropriateness of a new building. We don't, with that being in place, I don't think some of those buildings would probably be built the way they look now. Not to say they're bad buildings, but or make commentary on that. They might not be the appropriate building in the transition zones, especially as what we're seeing. So with that in mind, how could we do better? How can we do better in terms of understanding the historic relationship of what's happening to the adjacent spaces and how it relates to what's happening in the Uptown District and some of the other spaces. So I think the aesthetic approach to this, and actually the correct approach, was to not have a small building here that could be surrounded by larger buildings.
Okay.
Chris, this is Corey. Sorry, I've been trying to jump in for a little while, even raised my hand 3 times.
Sorry.
I do agree with Edna in that I think there might be alternatives or different options. And I just want to point out a couple things. In my experience, while I don't necessarily agree with what they did, my alma mater took all but the facade off of a gym, which would have been probably half the size of Withrow, and built a field house attached to it. So I think there are ways to do it, and I agree the scope. But Norm, you actually mentioned something that's pretty interesting, and you wouldn't be privy to this because these were previous meetings, but one of the big concerns of the HAPC over at least the last year has been that transition to different zones. And this is right on the edge of high density uptown and things of that nature. So again, I don't fault you for that. You'd have to be a HAPC junkie to know that. But one of the things you mentioned was the smaller, older historic buildings surrounded by the 4-story superstructure. And I understand that code and zoning permits that, but I wonder if you and the Dudleys had entertained, to Edna's point, of the original structure is shorter. Has there been any contemplation or entertaining of a shorter structure? One of the buildings we had in front of us that just came through, again, kind of pushing towards the edge, the old BP site won't be maximizing the entire height. I believe it's 3 stories, but they've used some liberties to extend the heights of the stories, but they're not using the full capacity of the zoning for that. Has there been, or do you think there could be some consideration, regardless of, I guess, with or without preserving some capacity of the original structure? Has there been any entertainment of a smaller structure so that it would kind of hillside into the traditional residential areas?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because absolutely. One of the things, even though we're calling this a 4-story building, it in essence is a 3-story building. We're not building it up 4 stories off the facades like a number of the other buildings that would meet that criteria or meet that uptown district development allowance. We in essence have a 3-story building where we're adding the 4th story within the roof structure itself. So we've made accommodations to already visually all the way around the building to bring that down. And interestingly enough, if you go to the north of this building across Church Street, on the corner is a historic building immediately across the street on Church Street. The building right behind it is a masonry building, which is a 3-story masonry structure with a gabled roof. And in essence, it's exactly the same as what we're developing here. It's a 3-story structure with a gabled roof. The only difference being is we are adding to that room up in that gabled area with dormers that allow it to be occupied up in that space. So that's, in essence, we have made the consideration of not thinking of the 4-story building, and we're immediately stepping off. If you're standing right in front of the building, right below the building and looking up, you're seeing the eave line, but you're not really seeing the roofs beyond that, except for where you start to see the dormers. So we did take into consideration about lowering the building and have, in essence, and the rendering will show that, and how we're using the components of buildings to make this look like it's a multiple series of buildings instead of one big building. So the short answer is yes, Corey, I think we have by making it a 3-story building.
Norm, is I'm looking on page 33 of your architectural group.
Okay.
And when compared to the building, so page 33, lower right-hand corner, the existing building next to it's 46 foot. And of course it's a flat top. So it's a different.
Right.
So the proposed building, and we had this discussion of, excuse me, midway through the roof line.
Right.
And I understand the variations in that, but I think it's fair to say that with the structure, the usable structure may be shorter, but I think the real structure is taller, and I'm talking overall structure. So for example, World Trade Center is not 1776, 200, 300 feet of that is antenna. So I'm talking true building height, not total impact height. So, I mean, I get what you're saying is we're using this, but then there's this much of roof. I think it's fair to say.
Corey,
Yeah.
I need to, if you don't
You're
mind,
fine.
to kind of hit the pause button because it's good discussion, but I think we still need to get back to Edna put a question out there. I'm not sure we got alignment or agreement on in response to Edna's question. And I also think let's look at that and look at the demolition piece. The points you're bringing up, I think, are valid, but it's more toward a discussion about the what would be the replacement building. So I'd kind of like to.
Duly noted, but I was piggybacking off of Edna's integration comment.
So Edna, can I go back to you? I mean, you've put a question out there. Do you feel your question has been, there's been a reply to your, have you gotten an answer?
I can reply to that too.
Okay.
Please. I think basically the answer is that you tried and you decided it's not possible. Isn't what you said, Norm?
It is possible, but I don't think it's the appropriate solution.
Sam, do you have?
So I did want to say, Chris, that you do have 2 attendees and we're 45 minutes in.
Right.
I want to probably see if they want to speak, but I also want to answer Edna's question, which I think what she's driving at is, can the city sort of, have a palette of options to look at instead of just the one option? And I think the sort of legal answer to that, and I'm trying to perk Ben's ears a little bit, which is, in a way, no, because, we have the carrot and stick method, and we've tried some carrots with this. We've talked about tax credits and restoration and different funding opportunities, kind of at the staff level that really haven't gotten much interest from the applicant team because they have another idea, and we haven't pursued the stick approach, which is, to be harsh, it's no, you can't do that. And, kind of the legal landscape is, property rights. And if the applicant did desire to go a route of restoration and retaining some of the building, then our job as a city would be to help them with that process. But to mandate it would be very difficult from a legal standpoint because we would have to have them on board with that. So it's kind of like a de facto denial if you have a condition of approval that the applicant doesn't agree with. So yes, I think it's legally possible, but not advisable. If our code required the applicant to show evidence they've pursued those different options, then I think we'd be on much better ground. But our code doesn't, the way it's written right now.
Mm-hmm. So, Sam, to your point about the comments, do we have anyone that wishes to the public to make a comment, or should we let Norm at least go through and present the 3D rendering with that?
Neither attendee has their hand raised, so actually one does now. So if you'd like to let someone speak, I can turn on their microphone.
Why don't we do that, just because consideration of time? And
okay. Monet, your microphone's turned on.
Hi. I just had a few quick questions. I was wondering, how do you see the destruction of a historic building in Oxford and then the construction of a new apartment building affecting residence life of on-campus students as well as Oxford residents? And then I believe that there was a comment made earlier that the school or the town was concerned about professor housing. And I was just wondering, is this building going to be for students, or will it be for a mixture of students as well as professors coming in? I guess I was unclear on that.
Norm, do you want to respond to that? The question, I think probably the second question, the anticipated occupancy.
Oh, I'm sorry, I accidentally muted there. One of the things that we did when we were trying to figure out how this would affect the community is we did come and we did talk to Sam. And one of the things that Sam was indicating that maybe might be coming in the future is some kind of study for a housing study that happens in Oxford. And there may be the consideration that one of the things that would enhance the Uptown District is to have apartments have housing in the Uptown District where within walking distance of uptown shops and stores, et cetera, for a new development or for a development that supported that. The intent then is maybe it's market rates, maybe it's a number of things that happen, but the intent was, can these be developed so that they are more directed to a professional group of individuals? Not to say that we have the opportunity to, or to the consideration of blocking students from doing that, but to have a professional approach in this building. And that was kind of the consideration of that. Sam, is that an appropriate kind of discussion of kind of what you had thought might be beneficial to the community?
Yeah, that was my long-term hope, that in order to support the year-round businesses, to support the businesses on a year-round basis, it would be good to have more of a long-term residency near the uptown area. Not purview of HAPC necessarily about who the users are, but that was the discussion that we had.
Yeah, because this is Chris. I would think that that would have to do more with the interior floor plan, the student housing versus, professional, which is again outside the realm of HAPC. That's more of a planning issue, if anything.
I hope that gives a little insight to discussion of community involvement.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Were both questions answered, by the way? I wasn't sure we covered both for you.
And no, my first question, my original question, was just, how do you see the destruction of a historic building in Oxford, as well as the construction of a new apartment building, affecting life uptown for both students and the residents of Oxford?
Well, I guess as a personal consideration, seeing as I've been an Oxford resident for 35 years, I understand the community's consideration of the changing nature of apartment buildings in the community and how it affects the overall development of the community. Since this is in a transitional zone, I think it is quite appropriate that it kind of mediates between uptown businesses and the residential area. So I think it's a good mediation in terms of the use of that of new construction that does that. This is a development that can be looked at for not only residential use, residence use, or for business use, but it could be used for professional buildings also. And professional use also could be a combination of a mixed use, which I think is a great benefit to the community. That one of the things of consideration, it's not too far from the hospital. Maybe there's some component of the first floor that is professional use also. Maybe there's a part of it that becomes retail or restaurants. It's not as if this is going to be, with the square footage of footprint, there might be the allowance to have a larger eatery uptown than some of the existing locations. So, and I can talk about that a little bit in just the footprint of the building. The consideration is a broad use of spaces in this building, not just all residences.
Sam, is there any other public comment? Someone wanting to make a public comment?
There is not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, Norm, if you want, I think just from given the information that you've shared so far and given where we are from a time standpoint, I think it would be best to, if you could, let's get to the three-dimensional rendering put together. So I think we have an idea of, from a spatial standpoint, how this would look.
Okay. One of the things and I appreciate you saying that, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I just briefly mentioned, if you see this as the footprint of the building, one of the things that the Uptown District does is, doesn't do, is it doesn't really address parking. One of the things that's benefit to the community too, that if large buildings do go in this area, there's no requirement that the development provide parking. In talking with Terry and Kathleen and the Dudleys in this, there has been a commitment that if a building was to go here and it was larger, that they would not be they would not want to dump all the parking that would be associated with the building onto the street. So the consideration is that a very costly consideration is to put parking underneath the building. So that's a component. The other thing is right now there's only 2 parking spaces on Church and 3 parking spaces on Beach. And then also on, so the angled parking, I know that's a separate consideration, but I think parking was very important to this too. So there's a community contribution, I think, to what would happen with the building here too. Now, the other thing in the building itself too is how this building sets itself apart from other buildings. And this footprint, if you were to use the overall site would allow for 81,800 square feet of space. That I don't find that to be appropriate. And so one of the things in terms of the development in this transitional district, so what we've done here is indicated what probably is more appropriate to the scale of this, and actually even below these figures, when the total net leasable space is someplace in the neighborhood of about 61,000 rather than up to the allowable gross square footage of 81. So I just thought I would mention that. Now, the rest of I don't want to go into a lot of the details of the appropriateness, but I hope that the document that we produced really shows that we looked at all of those guidelines and the recommendation and how the new building starts to do that. One of the things that was very, very instrumental in the development of this building was how the building can look as a building, multiple buildings instead of one large building. And so the recesses that we have in here or a number of things start to do that. But back to this footprint, I'm not going to belabor this because at the time, in essence, if this becomes a retail space here, or a retail space here, you could have a restaurant in the north east corner. This component over here could be professional development, which could be maybe offices or medical offices, law, legal offices, or whatever, which makes sense in terms of its appropriateness right next to a residential. This is commercial to the south. This is where the Princess Theater was, where the new building is right there. So having commercial on this part of the relationship, I think, is appropriate. It might be of great benefit to have professional offices or something in this part of the building, which has maybe a little less traffic, walking traffic, and it's adjacent to the historic building next door. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I will go down to one of the things that you haven't seen is you haven't seen the rendering. Now, one of the things that's important for us about the rendering is the way we start out the rendering process is we start with massing. How does the building mass itself? And that, in essence, talks to the size and scale of the building. Is that appropriate? And I know that was a major consideration before. And then what you have to do is you're laying on top of that, you're saying, okay, how does that massing, even though it might be larger than you would really like it to be, how do you mediate that with materials, with consistency thing? And so what we've used is we've used the design guidelines to help us look at other buildings and determine what things we can use on this building to break the massing and the scale of that down. Now, one of the things that I wanted to just briefly talk about, one of the ways that a scale, and you can see that in the package they got, one of the things we really wanted to pay attention to, I know these are buildings that are pretty much, all of these are non-historic contributing. But what I wanted to look at was what's happening on the buildings that are in Oxford right now. Most of the facades that you're seeing are very flat facades with some reveals that come in and out, maybe 8 inches, maybe a foot. That's that's one of the things that's consistent. And so there's a horizontal, the verticality that happens, but most of them are pretty flat structure buildings that don't have a lot coming in and out of the building. And so that was one thing to differentiate between a building. One of the things that has been done, a number of structures, is these two structures in particular. There is a higher building and a lower building. This is a 3-story, this is a 4-story. If you look at the building we're doing everything at a 3-story visually, and in essence cutting it off at the 3-story and then putting a roof on. The other thing that happens in this building, if you look at all of the buildings that are in the Uptown District, one of the things that doesn't happen is when you have a building that's a very long building or it's adjacent to a building, there's no internal separation of the upper level. I mean, it's a full flat facade. And so, on these facades, even though it has some articulation, it's very small amount, forward or backwards, 8 inches to a foot at the most. So we really wanted to pay attention to how do we make the building that we would have larger, not just have the intermediate small movement forward and backward, or just change color, or, just be continuous. And so when we start to look at that, one of the things that we have, and so the rendering I said is it starts with a massing study. The color that we have really looked at clearly is more, this one talked a little bit about those things that I was just talking about. This building does not have a fourth floor. It has a roof structure with components coming off of it. It isn't continuous. It has a break on the fourth floor, which none of those have. So this is kind of more of a transitional type of a building between residential and commercial. It has the sloped roofs. One of the things that if you go to the Uptown District and you really look at all the buildings, there's very few buildings, if any, that have the detailing of railing systems off the front. Now, the building that was done by Steve Hammond and Paul, which is where Starbucks is, that has some railings and also has a mansard. And of course, the mansard roof isn't applicable, nor should it be, and your guidelines indicate that. But putting elements that have that more pedestrian feel to it, that even though it's a commercial building to a certain extent, it is having characteristics that are more toward the residential look. So when we do the rendering, we start out with what's the mass look like? How do we add those components to it to really do what we want it to do? And then it's the color and the materials. So this is an all non-colored version that kind of shows what we're talking about here. Now this is relatively close. And one of the things that we did, you can see in context, this is the actual dimensioning kind of component of the setbacks. It's a 16-foot setback from the back of the sidewalk to the front of this building. But this building also in its components, all of this area here steps back even further. That happens on this component. It happens on this component down here. The other thing is with that, one of the things that happens is you can see what I talked about on the 2D pictures. This shows a very strong separation between this component of the building and this component of the building, and then the same thing that happens here. Guidelines talk about that if you have residential entryways, they should be designated and different than other entryways. Those elements here show the residential area of entry for both residential, but this is residential. Those are used to be able to discriminate and divide the building up from components. The other thing that happens in all the buildings uptown don't have projections for the most part off the buildings. They're mainly flat facades with very few projections off the building, if any, throughout the different locations. So one of the things that this building does, which makes it a little bit different, more of a residential character, is there's some projections off the buildings and making it more pedestrian, where people can actually, if they're on the second floor, and this is a residential floor, that they can come out, they can come onto a balcony, and they can engage with the street. I think that's really important, that this building just isn't an isolated building of large elevation. There's some engagement between those people that are using the street front, activating it by actually people in the spaces themselves. So I think that's really important. Yes.
Since you're talking about the decks there and so forth.
Yes.
Are those suitable? What are the dimensions? I mean, I'm looking at that, trying to understand the width. I mean, could you put, as presented, would you anticipate someone putting a set of table and chairs out there? Or?
No. These are only probably 2 feet
right.
At the most. The doors,
it's really not a
correct.
Deck.
But if these are double doors and they're French doors and they open in, then that gives somebody the ability to just stand right within the door itself and to be able to have access looking at.
I just want to make sure that I wasn't missing something in the presentation, that they were intending to be a balcony of sorts. They're really not.
No, they're not. One of the things that I did want to show, based upon what the other information that I had presented, was this last figure. And one of the things that we did is we looked at the widths of these buildings, and that's why the measurements are on a lot of the rest of these. We wanted to look at what the appropriate widths were, and most of those are really showing that they're somewhere about 40 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet. And so in terms of how I broke up the development of this, it's a component of space here broken apart, another component of space, and a separation here. So, trying to understand what the language is of the buildings uptown, and then how this fits into visually the widths of things that we're trying to component. So and you can see there's one building steps back a little bit further from the other. And this could be perceived as maybe a retail. This can be perceived as restaurant down here. And then this can be, it has a little bit different character and could be perceived a little bit more as a professional, with a professional having an overhang. So
I'm going to
go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
And I'm going to turn Corey loose because I know Corey's probably chomping at the bit right now on this thing. What you're talking about, I can understand applicable to the first floor where you could have professional or, restaurant, eating establishments and so forth. I get all that.
Yes.
But once you go from the second floor up, that's all residential. And separating them out, it is still one side, one building. The differentiation there, it's not as if there's different occupancies based on setback.
That's correct. That's correct. One of the things, if you look at one of the things that doesn't show in that rendering is the coloration. And what we're doing is on the upper levels, we're introducing another material, which is a more residential, which could be a lap siding hardy plank, which has a cementitious panel, which in essence then makes that upper area look completely different than the lower levels. So this area up through here and up into the peak of here and across becomes a different material. So it lightens the overall weight of the building. In architecture, I hate to use that term, but the weight of the building is reduced because you're not taking masonry all the way up to the eaves. You're actually putting a building material that has a visual lightness to it so that the building doesn't look so heavy, and it also reflects the characteristics of siding that happens in the residential area. So yes, it is going up, but if you think about it, if this was a 4-story building, it's going to be all the way up here and straight across, whether it moves in or not, or you start to step it in. What we've done is, instead of dropping back and removing this roof, we've in essence just gabled it back. I'm not sure if that answers the questions, but
getting
some
to,
description.
and I want to open it up to the other members of the commission to make their comments. I don't want to feel like I'm dominating here, but to Corey's point earlier, if you look at your last comparison was, this is the corner of Church and Beach.
Mm-hmm.
You're comparing it to the building on Beach, Princess, which is adjacent to the next building. Yet what Corey was saying earlier about this, that Church Street in essence serves as somewhat of a transitional area.
Correct.
To the next area. If you were to look at this building and I'm picturing in my mind this building superimposed on the lot, and then looking at the adjacent structures either side of it, even with the roof as you have it right now, this is a very large structure in comparison to what else is there, within the immediate neighborhood. If you will look to the buildings on the east side of Beach, or if you turn around and went on Church and went west on Church, this, would you not agree, is significantly taller and larger in size and magnitude, if I could use that term, compared to the other structures. It's all one building. Let's not kid ourselves here. This is all one structure. It's not two separate structures.
Correct. It is all one building, but the exterior facade and the movement of the facade and the openings that don't go up to the 3rd floor in various occasions. This building right here, this portion of the overall, with its openness above here, makes this visually look like it's a separate building with an entryway here. Now, this elevation itself, if you were to take this off, is a direct reflection of the building that is across Church Street, behind the historic building that's across the street. It is a 3-story masonry structure with a gable roof, hip roof, a gable roof that looks just like this. Yeah. So there's components of this that are reflective of that in specific is kind of a reflection of what's happening immediately to the north in the residential district and right beside the residential district, beside a historic structure. So yes, it is one building. But I believe visually that it's activated by its materials and its separation visually and because of the gable roofs. Now that's not to say that this element and this element couldn't be lowered a little bit to reduce the strength that we have in in that elevation here, which that could be, and maybe that's an appropriate reaction to this, is to lower this down. But this element and this element, yes, when you're looking at it directly in this location, it has a component of scale of, these components. When you're looking at it from church, and you're looking at the components too. So yes, it is one overall building with a redevelopment of aspects to it, which I believe provide visual separation.
At this point, I'd like to hit the pause button and enable
Yeah.
other members of the commission to comment. I know I've made a number of comments. Why don't we start with Edna? Would you like to say anything at this point? Ask any questions, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the role of HAPC is to think about the historic nature and the architectural preservation. That's what our mandate is. And I wonder, I don't see much here that reflects the historic character of the building that is proposed to be demolished, nor of the buildings across the street that, and down the street, what, 1 block away, am I right that 1 block away are those lovely little yellow buildings where the doctor's office is? And, I mean, there are the scale seems to me, even with these components, how can we enable a more concerted, something that's more in concert with the buildings that are across the street and that are surrounding it on Church Street and on in the general area. So I'm really asking a question and making a comment.
If I could respond, one of the things that I hope we did in the packet, which maybe we didn't do as well as possible, there's 22 design guideline criteria, or 22 items in there ranging from streetscape, foundations, masonry, porches, paints, etc. Those are based upon an analysis of all the buildings in the area. And one of the things that we did is we took each one of those and put those on 16 pages of explanation of what we drew from the buildings in the area and from the guidelines that we've applied to this building. So it might not be a specific building. It's as, this building, these buildings are called non-historic contributing. So they are contributing. They don't look like the buildings across the street, but they, they have the cornice, they have the areas, they have the verticality, they have, things that are up here. And, that's a completely different look. And it looks more like the Uptown District buildings. This is really the first transitional building that says, okay, even though on this lot, you could build that other type of structure up there with whatever modifications would have to be necessary per your appropriateness and review of appropriateness. This is the first pass, I guess, on the building that says, okay, we're not going to build that kind of building. This is a different type of building which talks more to this aspects of the guidelines, which I think in the 6 pages where we've talked about every single one of the design guidelines, no, it isn't the building that was there. It might not represent exactly the building across the street or adjacency to that. But the characteristics here have very carefully been developed based upon the design guidelines, in my opinion.
In essence, Norm, you're trying to make a new building, fit in with certain historical.
Correct.
aspects.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If I could, Dana, do you have any?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. It seems like the proposed design, just looking at first look at this, it doesn't fit in with the rest of the nature of the street with single detached houses. And in looking at that footprint, you could put 4 of the original 1847 style house in that lot, or some other type of design that's on a more scale to the original design. And then also, I guess I am learning about the nature or of this group in having the ability to save structures. I mean, it's for the amount of cost that it's probably going to develop this proposal. I'm quite sure the funds could go into renovating that original house as well. But yeah, I feel that I think there's been a great effort of trying to incorporate the architectural elements of the existing neighborhood, but it's still, I think it just overwhelms the street.
Okay. Oh. Corey? Are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry. Oh, I didn't realize my video was off. I'm just sitting here looking. It's one of those where I'm having trouble separating the two issues, and I still, so and this is the tough part. I think Norm's drawing, and I actually like the building. This is where I'm tossed. I like the new proposed building. I'm getting stuck on what's there, what we lose, and where it's at. So that's where I'm kind of stuck, because like the preservation side is saying one thing, but the development side, you know what I mean? And that's, I just think it's a really big structure for that corner.
The architectural side of it?
Yeah, I love the design. I think it's an incredibly beautiful building. I just think for that spot, it's really big. And as much as I like the building, again, I'm still stuck on what we're losing. And I get the numbers. I mean, I truly understand them, but much like Dana said, it's kind of, I've thought of that too, is like, wow, that's a lot of money to develop that. I remember last time everyone kind of gave me a wincing look when I said, well, insurance will cover most of this. And you know what I mean? The human nature of kind of bringing in the holistic side is making it tough. Yeah, so basically the 3 points in my recent rambling, I love the architectural design. My concerns are the size combined with the location, combined with what we're potentially losing from a historical sense. And that's, I mean, looking at the history of the town is more than just the facade of the building. So yeah, that's
Corey, if I could say something, if you don't mind at this time. One of the things that I brought in very early on, that this is a building that mediates between the uptown area and the residential area. Maybe it is the first of its kind. Maybe the historical nature of the building is based upon when there are things that can still fit into the community, but be a new language of the community that may be necessary. If the uptown business district is allowed to continue to build the buildings that it's been building, you know, that in essence somewhat replicate the historic large facades, but if they put those, as we've seen up and down on Church Street, on the Church Street location, it maybe is not as successful as it could be, and I'll just put it that way. And maybe there needs to be a definition by this historic group that says, here's a building that doesn't replicate what a historic structure is in a residential district, but it doesn't fit the language that's allowed in an uptown district for 4-story buildings with large facades. This is a building that represents the full design guidelines that we're saying that could be appropriate to a building, and there's a new language in town. Now, I didn't set out to do that, but I think the more that I got into the design of this and looked up and down the streets, looked at different locations in Oxford, this is a valuable site, and we've looked at it as a very valuable site in terms of its statement in the community. And I think to me, it says that there's a willingness to understand and promote historicism in newer buildings, instead of having a building that is just a complete antithesis of historical, which then influences the historical to look more historical, or a building that just replicates because it can. And maybe this is a building that needs to be done in Oxford to, you know, be recognized as something that is that mediating language to the community. I don't know.
Houston, sorry to leave you to last, but I know, please share whatever your thoughts and comments.
Well, obviously, I think we'll all be sad to lose the old building. After last July's comments, I was wondering if there might be a way to try to save it and incorporate it into the new development in any way that we could, but it sounds like that isn't going to be the case. As far as the proposed building here, it is a very large structure. But in my opinion, it's prettier and has better design elements than multiple other buildings that have already been built 4 stories tall on Church Street. So in that regard, I do appreciate the design aspects to try to limit what otherwise in other buildings and other projects has been just flat brick facades, and so I like that. As I noted in the previous meeting, I somewhat expected that this would be a very large project and a large building, and that is what is being presented to us. I guess it's better than what's been done before. It may not be as good as we all hoped or want, but I think it's a move in the right direction, and I think it's a pretty building for being a giant building.
Okay. Norm, anything you want to respond to Houston about before I make my?
No, I think his comments are quite appropriate. I appreciate it. And everybody's comments. Thank you very much.
So what I hear from, what I've been trying to do is not just in my mind, I've been trying to incorporate in the thoughts of, others on the commission. I mean, this commission is, the group's representation, group's thoughts on this, not just one individual. But what as I hear through this is, I think that the look and the appearance, it looks like a very nice building, attractive. I see where you've gone out of your way, Norm, to digest the guidelines, the design guidelines, and try to incorporate all of them in and so forth. Your net result, though, out of this thing is a building that, from a size standpoint, I think what I hear coming through various threads of the conversation, including my own, is some reservations about just the overall magnitude, I'm trying to think of the largeness of this structure, particularly on Church, Church and Beach in relation to the neighborhood for which this building is being built. So, with that in mind, I would just ask if there was any consideration, and I think we tried to go in this direction when we had the pre-application. Is there any appetite or any consideration to perhaps lower this structure, eliminate one floor?
Chris,
bring it down in scale so that it doesn't look as large in relation to the adjacent, buildings on Church Street.
Chris, if I could,
Go ahead.
I want to add earlier when you cut off when I was responding to Edna, that's what I was talking about with the gables. So if there is the ability to reduce a floor, I agree with Chris, but I think there's also consideration in the roof lines and things of that nature that could be taken. That's what I was meaning earlier when I was talking about the taper down and the totality of the structure. So Chris, I just wanted to reiterate.
I agree, Corey. So has there been any consideration, would that be an alternative that the property owners would contemplate? It's just seeing the structure, just a scaled down version, or perhaps, as Dana talked to, having separate and distinct structures versus having just one holistic structure.
As I mentioned, I think that the building is a 3-story structure, really does that already to a certain extent. I do agree that the gables that we have that are on the corner of Church and Beach Street there probably are too prominent. Now, under the historical guidelines, it indicates what the appropriate roof pitch would be. Now, that it should be at least a 612. You can see in ours, we've indicated something that's more of a 1012 pitch, which is even steeper than is a lot of residences and would actually bring the visibility of this down by lowering the pitch of the roof a little bit. And I think that's appropriate too. So I think the number of stories, I think, works well for what it is, but I think the pitches could go down a little bit, and I think the gables could go down a little bit. And I think that would reduce some of the feel of that.
Your roof is in essence, if I could use the term, masking the fact that you've got a occupiable
Yes,
floor in the attic.
yes, that's correct.
While they are, attractive looking, the slope of the roof and so forth, it is still adding to, particularly that one where you've, in the 3D rendering, where it shows, the ground floor plus basically all the way up to the roof line. It is a significant, it's a tall building. I don't think you can argue the fact that the overall height of this is, significant. And how does that in keeping with the neighborhood, not only the building to its immediate side, one side, what about the other side? What about across the street? In looking at all that, or can you imagine the people that are on, I'm trying to keep my references right, they're on the north side, that live on the north side of Church Street are now coming out and looking at this huge building across from them.
And it's 1/4 block from R1 mile square, which is low density.
Right. So that's just something, that, I've been wrestling with as I've studied this material. And by all means, I wish the rest of the commission to chime in, whether they agree, disagree, or, wish to present an alternative. It's just that that's the piece that I'm grappling with. Is probably, rather than grasping, I'm grappling with is just the overall, size and magnitude of this. Not so much the fact, I don't think we can sit there and say, oh, it must be the same exact footprint of what was there before. I get that. But I just think that to go from that to what is being proposed, it's just something I think that is very much out of scope for the neighborhood.
Chris,
Yes.
Sam, one thing that I might recommend is, that the direction the conversation is going, at least with several of the members, kind of back to the scale, maybe not all 5 of you tonight, but one thing we could go back to is we could go to the law director. I don't think we could ask for an opinion sort of on the fly tonight, but I know the previous law director had given us instructions that we were not able to mandate the height any less than what the zoning code allows. So we could ask for that legal opinion if you wanted to punt this one more meeting. I wouldn't want to belabor it beyond that. You could technically go to November, but I don't think there's just cause for going beyond one more meeting. I think probably the long-term approach would be to do some analysis with the whole Uptown District and perhaps the University Historic District and look at maybe suggesting some changes to the Planning Commission on maximum heights and letting that be your tool instead of this, the COA and the design guideline process. Because I think, the third leg of the stool we haven't done yet. Chris and I have talked about that a lot is, we wanted to do that this year and we didn't do it. We did the inventory, we did the code update, and kind of the thing that Norm has alluded to is exactly the thing that was talked about with the inventory is, we need to create some language for how new construction should be done. And the design guidelines don't address that very much. They just talk about the roof pitches and the materials. They don't get into the architectural styles or the tapering that Corey talked about. Mm-hmm. So that's the missing part of our design guidelines that I think designers are trying to find their way without much guidance. So I'm not saying that in defense of Norm as much as I'm just saying that is a fact. So regardless of how you land tonight, I think, you've got some options. I laid some out in your, staff summary. I will say that Prue Dana had her hand raised earlier. So I don't know if she still wanted to speak or not. But if there's another pause, or maybe me killing a little bit of time here, we'll see if she wants to say anything. But I'll leave it up to you, Chris.
Why don't we see if Prue, because while we wait for that, what I was looking at, Sam, and the packet that was put out in your staff report, and it's on page 6 of the handout. There's the one section that really kind of caught my eye, and it's kind of been, and I put it out there for the rest of the group to consider, and there's a section that starts with, in determining compatibility, the HAPC shall consider the following: the general design, character, appropriateness of the property of the proposed alteration or new construction, the scale of the proposed alteration or new construction in relation to the property itself, the surrounding properties, and the neighborhood. And that's kind of been just hanging in the back of my mind as, looking through all this material. And then particularly when I saw the 3D rendering. That's why I don't mean to keep harping on that, but it's just this nagging thought that how this looks in comparison to the rest of the adjacent properties in the neighborhood.
I have an additional point, if I may, and that is that we were going to talk about the parking issue and the parallel parking, and that also raises the underground parking that is being proposed. We are at the same time, we have been working as a community on more bike-friendly and walking-friendly streets and I don't see, this is not the part of HAPC, I guess, but I don't see how this contributes to that character that we are encouraging in the community, of more bikes, more walking, more alternate modes of transportation, and making so I see a little bit of a conflict there too. And so in that regard, it also in some ways doesn't quite fit in with the character of this area.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think your point about the parking, whether the angled parking, granted, I don't think we have that present anywhere else on Church. That's primarily a high street thing, and it's from Poplar down to College.
The angled, if I could, the angled parking occurs in this design, not on Church, but it occurs on Spring. I mean, on Spring, it occurs on Beach, which is right beside the same thing that occurs by the bike shop.
Yep.
So that angled parking kind of reflects that too. The site itself, from where the two alleys intersect, if you call that ground zero, when you go to the east, it drops 3 feet from there to the sidewalk between the buildings, and in the other direction toward Church, it drops 3 feet 6 inches. So when you see the plan, one of the things we've done in the elevations is the area that's up to the south is almost at grade at the street, and that's where outside parking bicycle racks would be, because the rest of the area takes steps up to kind of like a plaza area. Mm-hmm. So it does have that consideration of biking, but it's primarily on that south end. The south end.
Understood, Don. Okay.
Yeah.
Quick question on the parking. As I look at these, and maybe I'm missing something as I'm looking at the different designs, is this parking for the property, or would this be city parking?
I would assume that it would be for the property, because if you're going to have residences above, but it could be for people coming in and using the restaurant. And maybe there's a chit that's given to the restaurant to use parking there. That it's also, but it's in essence for handicap, it's very good that if you have spaces that are located in that lower level, people that are coming to the restaurant, coming to the residences, coming to, a professional building aren't going to be offloading outside in the street in the rain and getting in and all that. So I wouldn't say general public, but it could be accessed through gates, or it could be accessed, with permissions that's given out by the retail stores for parking for a
No, I'm
period of time.
talking about the street parking, sorry.
Oh, the street parking would be public. And,
Okay.
and that's
Sorry.
just, yeah, sorry. That's just a design consideration. I think it would be a benefit to this to have more street parking right there in front of it, especially handicap, that would be right there instead of just parallel parking. So, that's, as I said, that's an engineering that's down the road, but that would have to be public.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you, Norm. Yeah.
Okay. Sam, did Prudana come back wanting to speak?
No, I don't have a hand raised. Prue, if you're there, I've got your microphone turned on.
Okay. How is it now?
I can hear you now.
Great. Okay. It's been interesting listening to all of you talk about this property. And my point of view is, being that the difficulty of saving this building and the disjointedness of it is that you have a chance to start in a new direction. And I think this building does that. I sort of reflect everything you've all talked about. But what I'm most glad about is that they have lowered the roof from 4 to 3, and I think that's significant enough to make note of. There's lots of buildings that are now 4 stories, and I think anything that this can do to lower it to 3, which they have done, I really do think cuts down on the massiveness of what this building really is. So, thank you. Prue Dana, 131 West Collins Street.
Thank you, Prue. Okay. So at this point, I think in the conversation, I think we've had, a lot of dialogue in discussion, points raised and so on, providing feedback to Norm in terms of response or response to his presentation. Where do we want to go at this point? Do we want to make a motion regarding, to consider approval? And I'm looking at this in terms of 2 motions. One is, I think, to address the demolition, and then the other is to talk to the new building, the proposed new building. Why don't I start with, do I have a motion regarding the applicant's request for, and Sam, correct me, can we separate it this way?
You can.
Okay. So do I hear a motion regarding the request for demolition, given what has been proposed?
I would make a motion to approve the applicant's application to demolish the building at, I forget what our address is here. Is it 101 East Church Street?
Okay. Motion has been made. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank
Point
you.
of clarification, it's 101 West Church, correct?
So Dana has seconded. Any further discussion on the demolition aspect? Hearing none, why don't we cast the vote? Okay. Houston?
Aye.
Okay. Dana?
Abstain.
And
He doesn't have to provide a reason.
Actually, he does. The discussion of the, unless he wants.
You want me to provide a reason?
yes.
He can vote present if he wants. He doesn't have to provide.
I mean, I just guess simply feel it's not right to demolish that building, that house.
Point of order, Sam, he does not have to provide a reason for a present vote, a no vote, or a yes vote, or an abstain.
Actually, I'll defer to Mr. Mazer.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me okay? I tried to jump in earlier, but I don't think my mic was unmuted. Can you hear me okay, all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This was actually a point of discussion at our work session the other night with City Council. So from the legal perspective, I agree with Sam here. Our discussion the other night at the work session is that unless you have really, you should either be voting or you should be recusing yourself. So if you need to recuse yourself because you have a personal potential economic interest within this property and this decision, you should recuse yourself. But if it's just a challenging vote for you, this is something that you're grappling with, I think everybody here is grappling with it, you really need to either take a stance, vote yes, no, or recuse yourself because you have an economic interest. If you have any
Ben,
questions,
can you
please
talk
feel.
later? Because this is actually an issue I have. You have the right to abstain from a vote or vote present. That is a legal standing. So I would like to talk to you later about that, because nobody has to explain why they vote yes or no.
Hey, Corey, it's not a question of explaining why you're doing yes or no. It's you vote yes or you vote no.
You
or-
have the right to vote present. That is in law and Robert's Rules of Parley Pro.
Well, the information that was shared at the recent work session presented by the law director contradicts what you're just saying.
And I'd like to talk to the law director, because even people that we all publicly disagree with have lawyers who make
That's fine.
errors.
So getting back,
And you know,
As staff,
I would just say, you know, an abstention really has the effect of a no vote. But as I think we all know, but you really need to take a stance as a public official on this commission as to whether you vote yes, no, or recuse yourself if you have a personal stake in this, which, you know, creates a conflict of interest.
and Dana, I'm not trying to put you in an awkward position. That's not the intent.
No, yeah, I mean, based upon the criteria Ben just presented, I'll say my vote is no.
Okay. Edna?
I regret to vote yes.
The demolition, yep, okay. Corey?
No.
Okay. And my vote is yes for the demolition. Okay. So on a vote, as I counted there, 3-2, the motion does carry to approve the demolition. Okay. Now, I'd like to hear a motion regarding the proposed new structure. That is the replacement for the existing structure. So I have a motion to approve what has been presented by Norm Butts and the architectural group this evening. I have a motion.
if you did decide to do this, typically we would have a lot more details about the materials. So my recommendation, if there was enough support for this, would be to make a motion on the mass and the scale and the concept design, but not on the exterior materials and the details. You know, I mean, of course you could table it as well, but if there was enough support to do an approval of it, then you would want to condition that approval on additional information or revisions. As long as those revisions are acceptable to the applicant team, you wouldn't want to make conditions for modifications that are not feasible to come back and take a second look at.
So are we getting perhaps ahead of ourselves by making the motion, or should the group can think about, tabling this and having more time between now and our October meeting to kind of take into consideration what has been formally presented this evening from a replacement structure, and have, discussion at that time, and look to table this to the decision until our October meeting?
I think you have to take some action on the design that's presented, because the approval of a demolition leaves an open hole for the city. And we don't want to approve a demolition permit without some kind of expectation on what's going to happen with the design proposal. So I do think you need to take some action, even if you only approve the concept with conditions. So, and you could also table it to come back. But doing nothing would not be advisable on the design.
Okay. Having heard Sam's advice to the commission, do I hear a motion to reflect that perhaps we look to approve with certain conditions set forth? And not to talk about the building, not to include the building materials and other aspects.
So move.
Okay, so what would be the conditions that you'd like to see set forth? Dana, I assume you're making that motion?
Actually, I didn't have any conditions.
Okay,
So I thought there was some other ones from other members of the group.
okay,
Maybe I misunderstood.
okay. Would anybody besides me want to make the motion regarding, putting forth a motion with conditions associated with it?
I would put forth a motion with conditions, and I think we should have time to think about those conditions, because I think the scale of this is awfully large for this space.
Okay.
So
So,
with that in mind, you might table it until October.
okay,
I'll make a motion to table the applicant's application or preliminary drawings of the building so that we can get some better thought, better detail on it till the next meeting.
I would second that.
okay, Edna seconds? Okay. So, should we take a roll call vote on that, Sam?
I can do that for you if you'd like.
Yes, please.
I'll start with Mr. Watt.
Motion to table, yes.
Okay. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes,
Mr. Kiger,
Yes.
and Mr. Skoglund.
Yes. Okay. Motion carries. At this stage, I'd ask all members to give the information that's been presented and shared in hard copy, some, serious thought and consideration over the next, until the October meeting, and please come to the meeting prepared to express your thoughts and ideas and the direction that we want to give Norm Butts and his group and the applicant as regards this replacement structure. Okay.
Would like to thank all of you. I know it's a very, very difficult and important decision, so I appreciate all your time and all your considerations. And since I did just add the rendering as it stands right now to this meeting, you probably would not have a copy of that. So I would request that Sam at least provide you, or Sam and I work together so that he can provide you a copy for your own records.
And Norm, I appreciate, on behalf of the commission, I appreciate the level, the amount of detail, and particularly developing the rendering and being understanding with us too. As we go through this process, your application, your client's application is probably the first, consideration under the new service, under the new codified ordinance. So as we work our, way through this, please understand our path that we are taking on this, and the fact that we're not rushing to a decision at this point. We're trying to do what we can to make the best decision we can make.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Since we have no other business, do I, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Okay. Great, thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Houston, second. Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. I think this was a very good, thoughtful conversation, good dialogue, and I look forward to concluding this at our October meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.